On the 8th anniversary of the British vote to leave the EU, the Conservative governing party was trying to use the issue again for the election campaign. "Our country voted decisively for Brexit," said a campaign post by the Tories on X shortly before the anniversary. This despite the fact that the referendum on June 23 in 2016 was extremely close, with 52 to 48%. The decision was implemented by the Conservative government, while Labour leader Keir Starmer tried to reverse it. But it continued. And their slogan was, "We deliver, Keir hesitates." Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's Conservatives are far behind the Labour opposition in the polls for the parliamentary elections on July 4th. It is questionable, however, whether they can score points with the issue of Brexit in this election campaign. In the meantime, an average across all polls, a majority of Britons, with 57%, are in favour of rejoining the EU. In the last parliamentary election in 2019, when Brexit had not yet been completed, the then Conservative Prime Minister Boris Johnson managed to win a large majority in Parliament with the campaign slogan "Get Brexit Done." Since then, however, the wind has changed. The Tories are heading for a historic defeat. And meanwhile, Mr. Brexit Nigel Farage has spoken out again. The head of the right-wing populist party Reform UK made irritating comments about Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine in the run-up to the elections in less than 2 weeks now. "We provoked this war," said Farage in an interview with the BBC. I talked about this on Monday already. And Prime Minister Sunak then said on Saturday that Farage's claim was completely false and only plays into Putin's hands. In the interview published on a Friday a week ago, Farage then also said that, of course, Russian President Vladimir Putin was to blame for the war, but when asked what he thought of Putin, he replied that while he did not like him as a person, he admired him as a political actor because he managed to take control of Russia. Home Secretary James Cleverly accused Farage of repeating Putin's vile justification for the brutal invasion of Ukraine, and former Conservative Defense Secretary Tobias Ellwood described Farage's comments in the Daily Telegraph newspaper as shocking. And former British Prime Minister Winston Churchill would turn in his grave, as he said. Criticism of Farage also came from the opposition Labour Party. John Healey, who is tipped to become Defence Secretary if Labour wins, called the comments disgraceful. Farage's attitude made him unfit for any political office in our country, he said. Farage is standing as his party's candidate in the general election on July 4th in the Clacton constituency in the east of England, and Reform UK is currently ranked third in recent polls, behind the Labour Party and Prime Minister Sunak's Conservative Tories. I know there's one poll where this is different. But the former head of the Brexit party, UKIP, is close to former US President Donald Trump, who says he gets on greatly with Putin, and he might be next president in the USA again. But Farage was one of the leading Brexiteers, that's why I repeated that. Since the UK's exit from the EU, despite many Brexit promises, British brands and retailers have been struggling with the Brexit fallout and a significant drop in international sales to the EU. This has led to significant financial losses and affected the competitiveness of British companies. Exports of non-food products, particularly clothing and footwear, have been particularly hard hit. Sales in these categories fell dramatically from 7.4 billion in 2019 to 2.7 billion in 2023, and this decline can be attributed to several factors, including the increased complexity of trade and higher logistic costs created by Brexit. Following Brexit, UK businesses are facing significant red tape. The need to register as a trading company in the EU and deal with additional tariffs and VAT issues have increased costs for UK exporters. And a survey found that 98% of UK fashion companies experienced increased costs due to red tape, and 92% reported increased freight costs. The luxury goods market has also suffered greatly from Brexit. The loss of VAT refunds for foreign buyers has led to a 7.3% drop in international visitor numbers, resulting in a loss of £1.8 billion. EU luxury suppliers, on the other hand, are benefiting from these changes as they can continue to trade duty-free within the EU. While the UK government is working to sign new free trade agreements with countries such as the US and China to offset the loss of EU markets, the positive effects of these agreements are only likely to be felt in the long term and not if they ever come to light. In the short term, many UK companies are struggling with the immediate negative impact of Brexit. Brexit has caused significant damage to UK brands and retailers, particularly in the non-food sectors such as fashion and luxury goods, and the rising costs and bureaucratic challenges have significantly affected the competitiveness of UK exporters. Although new trade agreements could offer potential relief in the future, but we all doubt that, the short-term outlook for many UK companies remains challenging. But there's another issue from the election campaign that is not Brexit, that is rarely mentioned, and that's why I wanted to bring that in. Because the Scottish Greens have made the abolition of the monarchy an election promise. This was told by the co-chairman of the Scottish Greens, Patrick Harvie, to the British news agency PA shortly before the publication of his party's election manifesto. They are thus the only party to call for a Republic of Scotland, according to Harvie. And according to the plans, Scotland should become a republic with a written constitution and an elected head of state in the event of independence. The monarchy is a deeply outdated and fundamentally undemocratic institution. It represents a different era and feels increasingly irrelevant and ridiculous in the 21st century, said Harvie. Unlike the Greens, the Scottish National Party, the SNP, which also calls for separation from Great Britain, is not advocating the abolition of the monarchy. Until recently, the Greens were the SNP's junior partner in a government cooperation. Although the Greens currently only have 7 MSPs in the regional parliament because the SNP government does not have its own majority, they are the deciding factor. And after a dispute, they recently forced former SNP leader and First Minister Humza Yousaf to resign. Scottish Green candidates are also running in the British parliamentary election on July 4th. However, the party has never managed to win a seat in the House of Commons in London. Scottish independence is also still just a pipe dream. In a referendum 10 years ago, a narrow majority of Scots voted for their country to remain in the United Kingdom. Another referendum can only be held with the approval of the government in London. But there is no sign that this could be granted in the foreseeable future. But as I said, in July, the British will elect a new parliament and decide who will govern the United Kingdom. After 14 years under a Conservative government, a change seems quite likely. The British are tired of living in a country where little seems to be working anymore. The latest surveys by the well-known political scientist John Curtis, for example, also show that politicians in the United Kingdom have lost their most important asset, and that's trust. 45% of the Britons we surveyed said they are convinced that the parties are not looking out for the good of the country, but for their own interests. More than half of the population believes that politicians do not tell the truth when they make mistakes. And more than ever before, people doubt whether politics can really solve the problems at hand, he said. And that casts a pretty bad light on the political system in Westminster, according to the professor. Optimism looks different, especially in an election year. And one thing can already be said today: no matter who wins the election, change takes time. So the British will once again have to wait a little while the demands of everyday life are still what they are, and it will take time until those demands are solved. And we'll see how much patience will be there. But if you want to know more, the next video is right here in the end screen. I'll see you there. I'll be back.